Okay, so as we noted, we're breaking up our discussion of the Jacksonian period into two main parts. And the second part, which we'll get to, is the political aspect, which is Jacksonian democracy. But first, we're going to discuss the economic part, which we kind of foreshadowed with the American system. Okay, and that's the so-called market revolution. Okay, the market revolution. And when you think about this term market, first of all, it says market revolution. It's not industrial revolution. Okay, that's the first thing I want to emphasize. The market revolution was not our industrial revolution. Actually, our industrial revolution will occur, at least full bloom, after the Civil War. Okay, through the beginning of the 1900s. But the market revolution is still, a revolution as mentioned in the name. Okay. It is a transitional phase moving from, agrarianism or agricultural systems, economically speaking, towards an industrial system, all right, or industrial political economy. All right, so it's in between, it overlaps both. But it does still, according to historians, still deserves the title of revolution. So let's discuss why this is the case and what's going on here. Okay, so first of all, we have to discuss what is, agrarianism, because the first feature here is that it's no longer purely agrarianism. So what is pure agrarianism? It's when agriculture is the main political economy. And again, political economy means, the economic system tied with, your political system, like say, capitalism and democracy today, right, in our country. So when you have or when you're based on an agrarian system, it's purely agrarian. And if you're a small farmer, you're just producing for self-sufficiency. You're feeding your family. You might even be a tenant farmer for a landlord, or even in feudal times, right, the medieval era, a lord, right? That's why you have the social classes. Here's the political part, right? In agrarianism, like, peasants and lords and so forth, right? Even monarchs. Okay, so, you're in an agrarian society, you're bound to the soil, right? It's based on farming. And by the way, when did this happen? The agrarian revolution, moving away from hunting, gathering towards agrarian revolution, that happened way back in around 10,000 BC. Okay, it's a very long period where we were purely agrarian. Okay, so what happens here in the United States? Okay, each modern country back then had its own revolution, perhaps, but in the U.S., what happens is we no longer are purely agrarian at some point in our economic life, economic history. And that happens around this time, which we've been talking about, the era of good feelings, spilling over to the Jacksonian period. Okay, so the market revolution overlaps both eras. So no longer purely agrarian. That means that our economy is no longer based purely on agriculture, right? But it's still not purely industrial, like we said. So why is it revolutionary? Well, here's number two here. It's the market that, basically penetrates or pervades all aspects of everyday life. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that the market is how you get all the necessities in life, whether it's food, clothing, your shelter, or things that even luxury stuff, right? Or transportation needs, what have you. Today, it's so obvious and everyday that we don't think about it. When we get hungry, we don't think about this hardly, but we go to some kind of market, like a restaurant, where we exchange, money for food, right, the commodity, or we go to a grocery store, which is literally a market, right, or a drive-through, or we make something at home, right? We cook food at home, but that was purchased at a market, the food there, even before it's cooked, right? So the market, even something as basic as, our food every day, today is based on the market. But let's remember in an agrarian society before the market revolution, you had farming, which you grew it in your backyard, literally, right? Your farm on your, near your home, you grew it and you planted it, you cultivated it, and, you ate it, right? So you don't go to a store or market for that, okay? Let alone other things, eventually, like clothing. In agrarian society, there's such a thing as homespun clothing, or you might go to a seamstress in the village and, maybe barter, something, but you don't go to a store, a market, and, purchase clothes, right? Like, like, Nordstrom's or something, right, today. No, you do it locally, right? The person who made the tailor, for example, or the seamstress who made your clothing. You exchange it for whatever it was, and that's the way it was before the market revolution, right? So, yeah, food, clothing, transportation, all those things are now eventually going to be sold on the market to the point where you can't escape the market. Okay, now, market revolution, I'm not claiming that, the market is the way it was in, let's say, 1820 or 1830, the way it is today, okay? No, you could go probably to some remote parts of the country back then and see someone living off the land completely, maybe, okay? But the point is that the market is all over the country, right? It pervades all aspects of life. So this is the period in our economic history where that is accomplished, right? Okay, so what happens, therefore, a consequence is something I just alluded to earlier. No longer are transactions based on face-to-face local interactions. For example, if you were hungry before, and let's say a horseshoe, okay, if you needed a horseshoe, you went to the local blacksmith and you bartered something for it in exchange for it, right? That's a local transaction. It does not involve the market, okay? But today, as we know, and beginning in the 1820s, 1830s with the market revolution, well, those things might be made in a factory, right? And you just go to a store, a market, and you purchase it, right? You don't know who made the horseshoe. It was made in a factory. But before, in an agrarian society, you knew who it was. It was a face-to-face local transaction. You knew the blacksmith, right? So again, we take these things for granted today that, we don't know the people literally who make our clothes, right? We just have maybe we look at the tag in the back of a shirt and see where it's made, what country, but otherwise we just don't know who actually made your shirt, right? And any other commodity we think of today. It's very impersonal because the market is impersonal. Okay, because in a market society, you transcend localism. Okay, now speaking of industry or factories and industrialization, this is what's going to happen. But again, it's not an industrial revolution at this time yet. But you do see the emergence of factories by this time. So you have the coexistence of factories and, like farms, agrarian features. But in a factory, as we know, this is where things are made within this building called a factory. It's a major innovation in the history of economics, industry or factory production. Why? Because in the factory, you have things like division of labor, where you distribute labor among all the workers. Each worker or group of workers are doing one specific thing and they pass it down the chain, right? and this leads to increase in productivity. You can make a lot more, and the more you could sell, the more money you can make, right? You have an assembly line eventually that comes into play, and you hire people to work in it, right? They're called, and you don't, you pay them a wage, right? You don't just pay them, like grain for their labor, right? No, you actually pay them a wage. So what's happening on the, even in terms of labor in the industrial factory system, that factory worker and the factory owner made a deal. They made a transaction on the market. Think about this. When you apply for a job and you get hired, you're exchanging your labor for a different commodity, which is called your wage or salary, whatever it may be. And that's what's happening here. That's so new in the market revolution, right? In the factory system, you have a new class. Here's that political economy coming in, right? A new social class called factory workers, and another name for that is the working class. Okay, they didn't exist obviously before factories were around. They weren't. There was no such thing as wage labor per se, as understood in a modern sense, right? So here's where it comes into life, and still today we have wage labor, right? So this happens during the market revolution. Okay, so this is why it's so crucial to understand the market revolution. Again, it's a revolution in our economic life, economic system. It is not our industrial revolution again, but the market becomes omnipresent. It's everywhere now. That's why you call it the market revolution. It's hard to escape, right? Even then, you have to be, again, this guy on the fringe of society, right? To escape the market. Sure, you had those guys, the backwoods, but by that time, the market was all over the place. Okay, and this was enabled again through, things like, the American system and economic self-sufficiency, economic nationalism.